Particularly in the past 5 years, events of police brutality and racism have ignited and heated a social justice and civic engagement movement across the country. Can you provide some insight as to how we got here today as a nation?
We have a moment now where we've seen athletes, among others, be able to step up and again, send the message that it's not okay, that, we still have a lot of work to do and it's time to get to work.
Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of Make Today Well Live, the podcast. I'm Allie Norman Franks, Beverly Hills High School Wellness Counselor, and I'm hosting with our two peer counselors, Nick Kay and Kate Lewis. We are very excited to welcome our special guests, former NBA player, Harvard Law School grad, justice advocate, sportscaster, and lecturer Lynn Elmore. As we celebrate Black History Month, we couldn't think of a more brilliant and highly accomplished person to share insights on the importance of social justice, activism, and how our students can take impactful actions now to advocate for change for a more equitable future.
My name is Nick Kay. I'm a senior at Beverly Hills High School and a peer counselor for our NormanAid Wellness Center. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast here today. Your experience has spanned 5 decades, from playing high school and college basketball in the 70s to professional basketball in the 80s to working as an attorney and in sports management in the 90s to sportscasting during the last 32 years. How has your personal, athletic, and professional perspective evolved through your life, both on and off the court?
Well, I would say that based upon my growth as a person throughout the experiences that I've had, has really allowed me to not only mature, but to recognize how important it is to understand people. And I've met a diversity of people throughout those 50 years and more, as you mentioned. And I've come to appreciate differences and even celebrate those differences. When I look at my experiences, not only as a student in college, but also as a professional athlete and beyond. I've met a diversity of people, not just through race, ethnicity, et cetera, but also through ways of thinking. And I think it's really important to be able to understand folks and to be able to, relate to many of the things that I've heard and experienced through others. When you talk about things that I really learned as a mature individual, one of the things that I have to recognize is, I can only control the things that I can control. But I also recognize that it's important to speak my mind whenever I see inequity and whenever I see injustice, and try to assert yourself in a responsible manner. It's important through fits and starts to be able to understand that we can stand for what's right. We can stand for what's principled. And as far as I'm concerned, beyond that, as I've grown older, I recognize the importance of helping to develop new leaders and have through my experience. It's one of the reasons I started teaching. I recognize that throughout my life and many of the things that I've done, I've developed an institutional knowledge that I think is important and valuable. And what I said to myself before I started teaching 3 years ago is I can't take it with me, so I might as well give it away. And that's the importance of the vocation that I've assumed today as a teacher in Columbia University Sports Management Program.
In the course that you taught this past fall, athlete activism and social justice in sports, how do you define social justice for your students?
Well, actually, Nick, I don't define it. I allow them to define it. And I've had 3 courses now. Not only do I teach athlete activism and social justice, but also teach a course that works with the NFL in helping them with their social justice initiative. And over those 3 years, the definition of social justice has varied, and I can give you an example. In 1 year, it was the fair distribution of wealth, opportunities, rights, and privileges within a society. That's the one class's definition. Another year, a class said it's the fair distribution of wealth, opportunities, rights, and privileges with the objective of creating a society where everyone is equally recognized and protected. And then finally, in this year, it's kind of morphed into promoting the equity of wealth, opportunities, and privileges with the objective of confirming a society where the rights of marginalized and underserved communities are equally recognized and protected. And so, I think it's important to allow the students who are studying in this particular subject to be able to set the prism through which they're going to view actions, history, ideas. And, I think they did a pretty good job. I couldn't have done a better job in defining social justice.
I love that you have not only kept each class from the years past, kept their response to it, and you're able to see the difference between the students in each class and how their answers have been different. I love to see that evolution. Particularly in the past 5 years, events of police brutality and racism have ignited and heated a social justice and civic engagement movement across the country. Can you provide some insight as to how we got here today as a nation?
Wow. I think we've always been there since 1619. This country has had a history of subjugation, enslavement, belief in supremacy, also Reconstruction and attempts at reconciliation. And the chronicles are in history. We could go all the way back from the days that the first slaves were brought here to the United States. And whatever progress, has never occurred on a straight line. We've tried to progress, and then as a country, we've fallen back. I think the historical studies today recognize that, in many instances, we have reached climaxes in our history as a country. I think today is one of those climaxes, with George Floyd and even before that with the killing of unarmed Black individuals. It's just heightened and really magnified the issues of race that we've had here in the United States. The last time we've reached a crossroads similar to this was, in my lifetime at least, was 1968, when Dr. King, Robert Kennedy were assassinated, when there were riots in the streets because of those instances, but also obviously fused by the issues of inequity from an economic standpoint, as well as from a justice standpoint. And also you had athletes who began to protest. A little bit before that, Muhammad Ali stepped up and, as a conscientious objector, protested the war in Vietnam. And in 1968, at the Mexico City Olympics, you had Tommy Smith and John Carlos, wearing the black gloves and their warm-up suits unbuttoned to symbolize the issues that Black folks faced in America, raised their hands in a fisted rage, so to speak, during the national anthem to let the world know that, this was not okay. So that was a moment then. We have a moment now where we've seen athletes, among others, be able to step up and again, send the message that it's not okay, that, we still have a lot of work to do, and it's time to get to work.
Hi, good morning, Len. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Kate Lewis, junior and peer counselor at Beverly Hills High School. And you briefly were talking about how athletes have been pivotal in social justice movement of 2020. Can you continue talking about that? And which actions in particular have had the most positive impact while bridging the role of politics in sports?
Well, athletes today, because sports is so ingrained in our social fabric, I mean, it's so tightly woven that, athletes today recognize their importance and, the visibility that they have and the heightened platforms, with the advent of social media across, just about every medium. I think they've recognized that they've got a place to deliver their message. And that message is, it's time, as I mentioned before, it's time to get to work. It's time to get to work for change. And, the hope is that as they progress in understanding how to convey those messages, that those messages become better resonant among society. I mean, I can take a look at Colin Kaepernick, who essentially is the poster child for athlete activism. And like others before him, Colin Kaepernick sacrificed. And through that sacrifice, he's essentially magnified the issues. And I think that he, as a sacrificial lamb, will go down in history as one of those who has been a leader, and as someone that a lot of people would like to use as an example. Just as we talk about Muhammad Ali as an example, we talk about some other athletes who've stood up and taken the sacrifice throughout history. You know, I can think of people like Paul Robeson. I can think of people like, to a certain extent, Joe Louis, Jesse Owens, certainly Jackie Robinson, and even to modern day times, as I said, Colin Kaepernick. But other athletes have recognized that and they've spoken out. They may not have taken the route of Colin Kaepernick. And let me say that it's not incumbent upon any athlete to stand up and sacrifice their livelihood and their opportunity for the purpose of highlighting the need for social justice. I do believe, though, that at some point you'll have other athletes who will recognize their importance, recognize how they may have to step beyond the comfort zone of just speaking out and take an action like a Colin Kaepernick to be essentially a sacrificial lamb in the cause of promoting social justice in many ways. But so many guys and women have done just that. I look at Maya Moore, who sacrificed her whole career for criminal justice reform, particularly one individual. She literally one of the best basketball players, if not the best basketball player in the WNBA, but she ended her career so she could focus full time on freeing a man who was unjustly incarcerated. And that, to me, exemplified the type of athlete and the type of action that many athletes can take should they choose to make that sacrifice. But the opportunity is there. It's just a willingness of the individuals to take it a step beyond just speaking and messaging.
Since the opportunity is there, what changes in sports and society would you like to see to make progress on transforming the widespread embrace for social justice in America?
Well, certainly from an equity standpoint, racial equity standpoint, you know, we need to recognize that systemic racism has really retarded our growth as a society. And there are so many elements of systemic racism that need to be brought to the fore because there are so many people who don't truly understand what that phrase means. And there are many people who essentially have benefited from it and not even know that they've benefited from it. But the idea is to be able to recognize where those instances have occurred and to be able to find ways to strike down those barriers. The other thing is the acceptance of people on their merit, you know, the acceptance of people in their humanity. I mean, that's essentially, as an athlete in your insular world, that's what you're doing. You look at people on the basis of their merit, on the basis of their performance, and on the basis of their value to the team, which everyone has. And you recognize that value. If we could do that as a society, celebrate those differences, but also recognize how those differences make us all better. And that's what we do in the sports milieu. And I think as a society, we can certainly do that. Now, again, that's aspirational in many ways in sports, but that's the concept that we strive for.
That's interesting how you were talking that is aspirational for you to achieve that. And what advice would you give to people, to students in particular, because that is mostly our audience, to best achieve maximum impact, aka a slam dunk, for contributing to societal change and social justice?
Well, what I would say is that we all need allies, and we are never going to eradicate systemic racism. We're never going to tear down the walls of hate and indifference and discrimination and injustice that separate too many of us. We're never going to do that in silos. You know, we've got to find a way to find common ground. And I think empathy is the key, to be able to understand others' positions, you know, where they came from, how they got to where they are, what their needs are. I think that's truly important. if we can let go of, those things that create the barriers that are self-protective, and start to truly understand, put ourselves in the place of the other person, we will find common ground, and that's the beginning. So, that's my advice. Tear down, as Ronald Reagan said, and it's kind of strange for me to quote Ronald Reagan to paraphrase that. Tear down those walls, people, because that's the beginning of truly understanding, and it's the beginning of action towards equality, and I think that that's important.
Thank you so much, Len, for joining us here today. Those are all the questions from me and Nick, I believe, and I think we are both so gracious that you were able to come on here this morning and really talk about breaking down those walls, as you were saying, and talking about social justice and sports in general. So what made you move through your careers? Like, why did you go from basketball to being an attorney to, like, I don't know, I guess to all your different routes? Like, why did you make the move?
Well, I mean, I guess when I look back at my history, I could see that, I was influenced in a couple of ways. First of all, I grew up as a child in the 50s and in the 60s. I watched a lot of television, and in doing so, against the backdrop of the civil rights movement, protests against the war in Vietnam, I wanted to be in the parade, so to speak, for change, rather than standing on the sidelines. And in watching TV, I loved the lawyer shows, Perry Mason, the Defenders, et cetera, because, they were the voice for the voiceless. They triumphed for the innocent. And that's, kind of what I wanted to do. Now, of course, in my growth academically, and, from a sports standpoint, I really focused on trying to be the best student that I could be, but also the best athlete that I could be. And, basketball kind of interrupted my quest to be a lawyer. But I never forgot the inspiration that I received when I read a book about Paul Robeson, who was a human activist, a human rights activist, I should say, someone who spoke up about things such as lynching, such as human rights around the world and in other countries, and really stood up to the power structure, to the point where he, as an individual, he was an outstanding athlete, all-American football player. He played baseball in the Negro Leagues, played in the NFL, but also found a way to go to law school. And after law school, he became an accomplished concert singer as well as an actor. And so he did so many things, and that was attractive to me that, I'd like to be that too. He was a modern day Renaissance man. And then so that kind of inspiration hit me that told me, there are a lot of things you can do out there, a lot of experiences you could have. And so I never forgot that. And so I pursued those. I like to laugh and say, after 10 years of playing professional basketball, back in those days, we didn't make as much money as these guys today. So when I finished, I needed a job. So that's why I applied to law school. And fortunately, I was accepted to Harvard Law and got that opportunity and tried to make it pay. When I left school, I was a little bit older than my classmates. So, I didn't think I could afford the time to go to a large firm and try to learn my way through the practice of law. I went to the district attorney's office back in my hometown of Brooklyn, New York, immediately thrown into trial work, which I loved. And I learned an awful lot, as I had mentioned in my answer before. I got to experience so many different people in so many different situations, including the police. The sad part about it is I wound up prosecuting police brutality in my last couple of years in the DA's office. And sadly, so many of the same issues that we face today were in existence back in those days. But, that's kind of my career arc. And broadcasting was an equally important part of my life, having gotten myself involved in college sports to the point now where, I am a co-chair of a reform-minded group called the Knight Commission, looking to, try to make college sports more attendant to the education, health, safety, and welfare of and success of student athletes. So there are a lot of things that influenced me, a lot of things that I wanted to be able to do and touch. So, when it's all said and done and I'm back in my rocking chair, I could say that I tried to make a difference.
Thank you, Lynn, for being a guest on our show. It was truly an honor to meet you. I want to thank Mike Berg, who is the creator of the Teen Choice Awards and Stronger Than You Think, for introducing me to Lynn Elmore. I also want to thank our ongoing monthly supporter, Michael J. LeBeau, as well as Beverly Vista Middle School PTA and Beverly Hills High School PTSA for their ongoing support. And of course, a huge thank you to KBEV for producing our show. Thank you for listening. Stay safe and make today well lived.